My name is Bethany. I'm 68 years old, and for the last 2 years, I've been living in a ghost story of my own making. Not the kind with rattling chains and spectral apparitions, but the kind with the ghosts of broken promises and the chilling silence that follows a profound betrayal. It's a story about my son, my daughter-in-law, and a very, very clever trap left behind by my late husband. They thought they had outsmarted a grieving old woman. They thought they had secured a future of immense wealth and power for themselves. But they made one catastrophic mistake. They never truly understood the man they were stealing from, and they certainly never understood me. They thought the story was over when they wrote me out of it. What they're only just beginning to realize is that I'm the one holding the pen now, and I'm about to write the final chapter. The air in my husband's study still smells faintly of him, a mix of old books, cedar, and the subtle, clean scent of the aftershave he used for 42 years. It's a scent that used to bring me comfort, a tangible echo of his presence. Now it feels more like a war room, and I, his unlikely general, on the polished mahogany desk, sitting under the warm glow of his favorite brass lamp, is a thick leather-bound portfolio. It's the Robert P. Miller Family Trust. To my son and his wife, it was a treasure map. To me, it was a testament. And now it's a weapon. Robert was a builder, not just of the custom homes that made our family comfortable, but of systems, of plans. He was a quiet, meticulous man who saw the world as a series of load-bearing walls and potential points of failure. He believed in foundations, in rebar, in triple-checking every measurement before you ever poured the concrete. He applied that same philosophy to our life, our finances, and ultimately to his own legacy. When he got sick, the diagnosis came like a wrecking ball, swift and devastating. But Robert, even in his decline, was still a builder. His final project wasn't a house of wood and stone, but a fortress of paper and ink. Our son, David, was his greatest pride and his most persistent worry. David was brilliant, no question. He'd sailed through law school and landed a coveted position at a prestigious corporate firm in the city. He had Robert's intellect, but lacked his father's quiet conviction. David was more malleable, more concerned with the appearance of success than the substance of it. I saw it as a product of his generation. Robert saw it as a vulnerability. And then came Cassandra. She swept into David's life like a summer storm, dazzling, loud, and rearranging everything in her path. She was also a lawyer, though she didn't practice in a traditional sense. She was a consultant, a shark who specialized in finding the lucrative loopholes in contracts, the fine print that others missed. She had a smile that was all teeth and a mind that was all angles. When she looked at our comfortable life, the fruits of Robert's and my decades of hard work, she didn't see a family's history. She saw an under-leveraged asset. After Robert passed, the grief was a fog I could barely navigate. David was a comfort at first, but his visits grew more structured. He'd bring Cassandra, and the conversation would inevitably drift from my well-being to the management of the estate. They used words like optimization and efficiency. Cassandra, in particular, spoke of the trust Robert had established not as a safety net for me, but as a cumbersome relic that was preventing David from realizing his full potential. The inciting incident, the moment the first crack appeared in the foundation of my life, happened on a rainy Tuesday in October. They called a family meeting, a term so corporate and cold it made me shiver. We sat in my living room, the one Robert and I had decorated together, filled with memories of Christmases and grandchildren's birthday parties. Cassandra, perched on the edge of the ottoman like a bird of prey, did most of the talking. She said, "Bethany, we've been reviewing the trust documents, and our legal team feels there's a way to significantly improve its tax efficiency. It involves a minor restructuring." David, your own son, the corporate lawyer, sat beside her, nodding like a marionette. He wouldn't meet my eye. He just stared at a point on the wall somewhere over my left shoulder. She slid a sheaf of papers across the coffee table. They were dense with legalese, but the message was wrapped in the condescendingly simple language one uses for a child or a senile old woman. She explained that by signing, I would be helping David take on the full fiduciary responsibility, allowing him to make agile decisions in a fast-moving market. It was all nonsense, a word salad designed to obscure the truth. They were asking me to sign away my voice, my standing, my place as Robert's partner. They were asking me to become a dependent in the life I had helped build. I felt a cold dread wash over me, a physical sensation that started in my stomach and spread to my fingertips. My son, my David, was sitting there while his wife patronizingly explained how they were going to erase me from my own financial life. The hurt was so sharp, so breathtaking, I almost couldn't speak. But then, through the fog of shock and pain, a memory surfaced, a whisper from the past. Robert, his hand frail, but his grip surprisingly firm in mine, his eyes clear and intense. Read everything, Beth, especially the boring parts. I've built you a back door. I looked at the signature line. I looked at my son, who finally chanced a glance at me, his expression a miserable cocktail of guilt and resolve. He thought this was his moment to finally step out of his father's shadow. Cassandra thought she had executed a brilliant bloodless coup. So I picked up the pen. My hand was shaking, but not from fear. It was from a rage so cold and deep it felt almost serene. I signed the papers. I pushed the stack back toward them and said, "I hope this is what's best for the family." Cassandra's smile was triumphant. She thought she had won. She had no idea she'd just handed me the keys to the entire kingdom. The drive home from that meeting was a blur. The rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers seemed to be counting out the seconds of my new, diminished life. When I pulled into my garage, I couldn't bring myself to get out of the car. I just sat there, the engine ticking as it cooled, and I finally let go. The tears weren't loud or hysterical. They were silent, hot tears of a grief far deeper than the one I felt when I lost Robert. This was a different kind of death. It was the death of the family I thought I had, the death of the image I held of my own son. He had stood by and watched his wife dismantle my life, my standing, my connection to everything Robert and I had built. He hadn't just allowed it, he had co-signed it. It wasn't about the money. I have to make that clear. Robert and I had lived modestly for years, even after his business became wildly successful. We found joy in simple things: gardening, long walks, time with our granddaughter, Chloe. The money was a tool, a resource to provide security and opportunity. It was never the goal. What they took from me in that living room wasn't wealth. It was respect. It was my history. They had demoted me from matriarch to pensioner, from partner to dependent, and they had done it with a condescending smile. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the quiet house, my hand trailing along the walls, touching the frames of photos. There was Robert and me on our wedding day, two kids with no idea what lay ahead. There was a picture of me holding a newborn David, his tiny hand wrapped around my finger. How do you get from that moment of pure, unconditional love to this? To a son who would so casually cast his mother aside for the sake of, what? A bigger house? A faster car? The approval of a woman like Cassandra? My mind kept replaying a conversation from Robert's final weeks. He was in his favorite armchair, a thick Afghan over his legs, looking out at the garden he so loved. The chemo had ravaged his body, but his mind was as sharp as ever. He'd called me over, his voice a dry rasp. "Bethany," he'd said, his eyes locking onto mine with a familiar intensity. "We need to talk about the trust, about David." I sat on the stool beside him, taking his hand. It felt like a bundle of twigs wrapped in paper. "I've made him the primary trustee and the primary beneficiary," he said, and watched my face for a reaction. I couldn't hide my unease. "Robert, are you sure? He's a good man, but Cassandra has so much influence over him." Robert gave a slow, deliberate nod. "That is the entire point," he said. "A man's character isn't defined when things are easy. It's forged when he's given power, when he's faced with temptation. I have to know what he's made of. I have to give him the chance to be the man I raised him to be." He squeezed my hand. "But I am not a fool, my love, and I am not gambling with your future. I am a builder. I have built a firewall." He tapped his temple. "It's in the appendices. the boring parts. The parts a man like David, who thinks he's the smartest person in every room, will gloss over. The parts a woman like Cassandra, looking for obvious loopholes, will never think to read. She's a sprinter, looking for a shortcut. She'll never have the patience for a marathon through boilerplate legal text. He made me promise. Let him have the reins, Beth. Let him show you who he is. Promise me you'll wait. Don't step in unless you are absolutely certain you have to. Let him make his choice. I promised. It was the last real promise I ever made to him, and for 2 years I had kept it. Through every subtle dig from Cassandra, through every instance of David putting her wishes before the family's traditions. I remembered a family dinner a few months ago. We were celebrating my granddaughter Chloe's 16th birthday. I had bought her a simple, elegant silver locket, the kind of timeless piece she could wear forever. When she opened it, her eyes lit up, but Cassandra, from across the table, had let out a little tinkling laugh. "Oh, that's very traditional, Bethany. I was just telling David we should get Chloe a smart watch, something a modern girl can actually use." She said it with a bright smile, but the implication was clear. I was old, out of touch, my gift quaint and useless. David just sat there, shoveling mashed potatoes into his mouth, refusing to meet my gaze. Chloe, caught in the middle, mumbled a thank you and quickly put the locket back in its box. The joy was gone from her face. It was a small thing, a pinprick of disrespect, but it was part of a pattern, a death by 1,000 cuts. The true low point, the moment my grief curdled into something colder and harder, came a week after the restructuring. An email arrived in my inbox. The subject line read, "Trust Distribution and Budget." It was from Cassandra. Inside was a spreadsheet, a meticulously detailed, color-coded spreadsheet, outlining my new monthly stipend. She had budgeted my life. There were line items for groceries senior discount eligible, utilities consider energy-saving measures, and even miscellaneous and hobbies limited. It was the most profoundly humiliating document I had ever seen. They had taken the vast resources Robert and I had built, a value in the high 8 figures, and allocated me a pittance, as if I were a child receiving an allowance, and they had the audacity to track it. That was it, that spreadsheet. It wasn't about revenge before that moment. It was about hurt, about loss. But looking at that condescending, insulting document, something inside me snapped. The grief turned to ice. The sorrow hardened into resolve. This was not about protecting my feelings anymore. This was a war that Robert had foreseen, and it was time for me to finally show up for the battle. They arrived on a Thursday afternoon. It was another gray, drizzly day, the sky weeping in sympathy. I watched from the living room window as they pulled up, not in Cassandra's now repossessed Mercedes, but in a modest sedan that looked like a rental. David got out first. He looked smaller, diminished. His shoulders were slumped, and the arrogant confidence he used to wear like a bespoke suit was gone, replaced by a cheap, off-the-rack anxiety. Cassandra emerged from the passenger side, a thundercloud in a cashmere coat. Her face was a tight mask of controlled fury. Trailing behind them was their lawyer, a slick-looking man in his 40s, with a briefcase that probably cost more than my first car. I had Arthur meet them at the door. I waited in the living room, standing by the fireplace, a portrait of Robert and me in happier times, smiling down from the mantel. Margaret's audit, bound in a simple black folder, sat on the coffee table. When they entered the room, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Their lawyer started to speak, launching into some prepared speech about finding an amicable resolution for the good of the family. Arthur cut him off with a raised hand. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries, shall we, Mr. Hayes? Your clients attempted a hostile takeover of a trust, were outmaneuvered by the very document they sought to exploit, and now they are here to ask for scraps. Is that a fair summary?" The lawyer's jaw tightened. Cassandra shot daggers at Arthur, then at me. "This is absurd," she hissed. "Bethany has manipulated this situation." It was then that I spoke, my voice quiet but carrying across the silent room. "No, Cassandra. I didn't manipulate anything. I just read the contract, a skill you both, as lawyers, should perhaps cultivate. I looked past her, past the lawyers, and locked eyes with my son. He flinched, his gaze dropping to the Persian rug. David, I said, and his head snapped up. This was never about the money, not for me, and not for your father. It was a test of character. Your father gave you his trust, his legacy, his name, and you turned around and handed the keys to his kingdom over to your wife, because she promised you a shinier crown. He gave you a responsibility, and you treated it like a lottery ticket. I turned my gaze to Cassandra. It felt like turning a high-powered hose on a smoldering fire. And you were so clever. You saw what you thought was a weakness, an old woman lost in her grief. You saw a legal document as a set of rules to be bent, but you didn't read the footnotes. You were so busy planning your victory parade, you failed to notice you were marching straight off a cliff. Your husband's father built this trust, like he built a house to withstand a storm. You, Cassandra, were the storm he planned for. David made a choked sound, a half sob, half gasp. Mom, sorry. The words were meaningless now, ashes in the wind. Sorry you got caught, David, or sorry you did it. I didn't wait for an answer. I picked up the black folder from the coffee table and slid it across the polished wood. It stopped right in front of him. This, I said, is a detailed accounting of your trusteeship over the past 6 months. The cars, the secret apartment, the trips, the money you funneled to Cassandra's family. It's all in there. Margaret and I were very thorough. You didn't just spend the income. You started selling the assets Robert left for his grandchildren. For Chloe, I let that hang in the air. Finally, David looked at me, his eyes full of a desperate, pleading shame. But it was too late for shame. The damage was done. So here is the new reality, I announced, my voice as hard and cool as the marble on the hearth. The Robert P. Miller Family Trust is now under my sole and permanent control, exactly as its founder intended under these circumstances. The house you are living in is an asset of the trust. The trust will be selling it. The cars you were leasing through the trust have been returned. I suggest you find a good rental agent. I am establishing a separate protected educational trust for Chloe, which she alone will access when she turns 25. It will be more than enough for her to get any education she desires and start her life. As for the two of you, I paused, looking from my son's broken face to his wife's mask of hatred. You will receive nothing. You have already plundered your inheritance. Cassandra finally exploded. You will not get away with this, you bitter old witch. We will fight you. We will drag your name through the mud. You will do nothing. Arthur interjected, his voice calm but layered with steel. Because this folder, he tapped the audit report, contains enough evidence of misappropriation of funds for me to make a referral to the district attorney's office. Your stunt with the shell company alone borders on criminal fraud. So, I suggest you take your client and leave, Mr. Hayes, before my client changes her mind about being merciful. The color drained from their lawyer's face. He knew he was beaten. He muttered something to Cassandra, who stood there, vibrating with a rage that had nowhere to go. David just sat, his head in his hands, weeping quietly. Next, I logged into the trust's main checking account. The balance was sickeningly lower than it should have been, but still substantial. I scanned the recent activity. My eyes landed on a pending transaction from the day before, a charge for $12,500 from a jeweler famous for its obscenely large diamonds. Cassandra was treating herself to a little victory bauble. A wave of fury, clean and hot, washed through me. I found the freeze account button. I clicked it. Then I went to the credit card management page. I saw their names: David Miller, Cassandra Miller. Authorized users on a card with a dizzying credit limit, paid for by the trust. I clicked Cancel Card. For both of them, a small pop-up asked for a reason. I typed Fraudulent Activity by Unauthorized Users. It felt good. The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a well-laid trap waiting to be sprung. I spent the afternoon in my garden, pruning Robert's roses, the sun warm on my back. I felt more at peace than I had in 2 years. I was just trimming a particularly stubborn thorny branch when my phone, sitting on the patio table, began to ring. It was David. The first volley was one of confusion. "Mom, something weird is going on," he said, his voice laced with annoyance. "I just tried to buy gas and my card was declined. Cassandra's too. She tried to call the concierge service and they said the account was closed. I've been on hold with the bank for 20 minutes. I think there must be a major fraud alert or something." This was the moment. My performance had to be perfect. I infused my voice with the gentle, slightly befuddled concern they expected of me. "Oh my goodness, David, that sounds terrible," I said. "Declined? How embarrassing for you. But you're the trustee, dear. You should have the direct line to the bank manager. I'm sure you'll sort it out." I could hear the gears turning in his head. He was still operating under the assumption that he was in charge, and this was just a bureaucratic headache. Yeah, I will. It's just a pain. I'll call you back when it's fixed." He hung up. He still didn't get it. But his wife would. The second call came exactly 47 minutes later. It was not David. It was Cassandra, and the velvet glove was off. Her voice was a shard of ice. "Bethany, what did you do?" There was no preamble, no pretense. I continued to prune my roses, snipping a dead bloom with a satisfying thwack. "Cassandra, what a surprise to hear from you. To what do I owe the pleasure? Don't you play dumb with me, you old—" She cut herself off, but I could feel the venom sizzling down the line. "The bank just told me the trusteeship of the trust has been legally changed. They said they received a court order. They said all access has been frozen pending instruction from the new trustee." I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, enjoying the image of her, probably pacing her marble-floored foyer, her face a mask of furious disbelief. "Well," I said finally, my voice as calm and placid as a summer lake, "the bank is a reputable institution. I'm sure their information is correct." "What did you do?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "This is illegal. David is the trustee. We will have you in court by morning. We will sue you for everything you have." I smiled. She had just admitted, on the phone, to knowing the trusteeship had been changed. It was a beautiful little gift. "Cassandra," I said, my tone still infuriatingly gentle, "I think you and David need to calm down and do a little light reading. I'd start with the original trust document your father-in-law so carefully prepared. Have a look at the appendices. Specifically, I believe it's clause 1138. It's very illuminating." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "You have a wonderful rest of your day," I said, and before she could unleash another torrent of threats, I ended the call. I imagined the scene vividly, the frantic scramble through their perfect minimalist home office, the tearing open of drawers and files, the moment one of them finally found their copy of the portfolio, the rustle of pages as they flipped to the back, and then the horrified dead silence as they read those beautiful, brutal words, the words that confirmed their brilliant legal coup was, in fact, an act of self-immolation. They had not seized control. They had triggered a time bomb, and it had just vaporized their entire world. The fallout was just beginning, and I was going to enjoy watching every second of it. The immediate aftermath of my silent takeover was a cascade of frantic, sputtering rage from David and Cassandra, followed by an eerie quiet. The first few days were punctuated by a series of increasingly hysterical voicemails and a flurry of emails with subject lines in all caps, filled with empty legal threats and personal insults. I didn't respond to any of them. I forwarded the legal threats to Arthur, who dismissed them as the desperate flailing of the cornered, and I deleted the personal insults without a second thought. My calm, I discovered, was my most potent weapon. It drove them insane. My next call was to Margaret. I read her the clause over the phone. There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by a sound that I can only describe as a cackle of pure, unadulterated joy. "Oh, you magnificent man, Robert Miller," she crowed. "Bethany, this is better than I could have imagined. This is poetry." "So what do I do?" I asked, feeling a surge of adrenaline. "First," she said, her tone shifting back to business. You do nothing. You let them enjoy their victory. Let them get comfortable. Let them keep spending. The deeper the hole they dig, the better. Second, she said, I needed a lawyer, not just any lawyer. You don't fight a shark like Cassandra with another shark, Margaret advised. You fight her with a fisherman, someone who knows their habits, has the right gear, and has the patience to wait for the perfect moment to set the hook. She gave me a name, Arthur Vance. He was a semi-retired estate lawyer, a contemporary of Robert's, who had a reputation for being quiet, thorough, and absolutely relentless. He operated out of a small, unassuming office above a bookstore, a world away from the gleaming glass towers of David's firm. My meeting with Arthur was a revelation. He was a tall, stooped man with kind eyes and a handshake as firm as oak. I laid out the whole story, my voice steady now, fueled by purpose. I showed him the original trust, and the new documents David and Cassandra had me sign. He read everything in a focused silence, occasionally making a small note on a yellow legal pad. When he was finished, he took off his reading glasses and polished them with a handkerchief. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a glint of the fisherman Margaret had described. Mrs. Miller, he said, his voice a calm baritone, your late husband was a genius, and your son, for a man with a law degree from Yale, is a spectacular fool. He chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. He and his wife committed the oldest sin in the book. They were so proud of their own cleverness, they assumed everyone else was an idiot. This clause, he tapped the page, is an executioner's song. It's beautiful. Arthur laid out the plan. It was simple, elegant, and ruthless. We don't send a warning shot, he explained. We don't engage in threats or negotiations. That's their game. We play ours. We will prepare a formal notice of trustee change, citing Clause 1138. We will file it with the court, and simultaneously serve it to every financial institution that holds a trust asset, the banks, the brokerage houses, the property management firms. By the time David and Cassandra even realize what's happened, the locks will have already been changed. He explained the legal nuances, how their restructuring document was the very evidence we needed. My signature wasn't an act of surrender. It was the act of arming the device. They handed you a loaded gun, Mrs. Miller, Arthur said, a thin smile on his lips. All we have to do now is pull the trigger. While Arthur prepared the legal barrage, Margaret came over. We armed ourselves with coffee and lemon cookies and began our own investigation. I still had access to the online statements from the trust's main accounts for the period before they locked me out. What we found made my blood run cold. Their restructuring wasn't a future plan. It was a retroactive justification for a spending spree they had already begun. They had been plundering the trust for months. There was a $50,000 down payment on a new Mercedes for Cassandra, a wire transfer for $80,000 to an LLC I'd never heard of, which Margaret, with a bit of online digging, discovered was a shell corporation registered to Cassandra's sister. There were first-class tickets to Bali, charges from designer boutiques in New York and London. They were living like lottery winners, spending Robert's legacy as if it were an infinite resource. Looking at the list of extravagant purchases, a new feeling began to bloom alongside the cold anger, a profound sense of duty. This was no longer just about my own pride or hurt. It was about protecting what Robert had built from the rapacious greed of his own son and the woman who held his strings. It wasn't about revenge anymore, not entirely. It was about justice. It was about honoring my husband's foresight. They thought they were building their new empire, but Robert, the master builder, had made sure their foundation was built on sand, and the tide was about to come in. The day Arthur Vance called it D-Day, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For weeks we had been in the planning stages, a quiet, underground resistance movement run from my kitchen table and his dusty office. But on that Tuesday morning, the waiting was over. Arthur's voice on the phone was crisp and professional. Bethany, the filings have been accepted by the court. The faxes and certified letters have been sent to all financial institutions. As of 9:01 this morning, You are the sole and legally recognized trustee. The ball is in your court. I hung up the phone and took a deep breath. The power was a palpable thing, a weight in my hands. I sat down at Robert's desk, opened my laptop, and navigated to the primary investment portal for the trust. I typed in the old login credentials David had set up. Access granted, for now. The first thing I did was change the master password to a long, complicated string of characters that only I knew. The second was to change the registered email and phone number from David's to my own. Click. The digital door was slammed shut and bolted. I picked up the phone and called my best friend, Margaret. Margaret and I have been friends since our sons were in kindergarten together. She's a retired certified public accountant, a woman who finds a deep spiritual satisfaction in a perfectly balanced ledger. She is practical, sharp, and has the nonsense tolerance of a hungry badger. I explained everything, my voice cracking with a shame I couldn't suppress. I told her about the meeting, the papers I signed, and finally the spreadsheet. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Margaret said, her voice dangerously quiet, "That woman needs to be launched into the sun." I let out a shaky laugh. "I know." "No, you don't know," she countered, her voice heating up. "You're still thinking about this with your heart, Bethany. You need to start thinking like an auditor. Robert Miller was the shrewdest man I ever knew. He would never ever leave you exposed like that. Never. What did he tell you before he passed?" "You told me he said something about a back door." Her words were like a splash of cold water. "He did," I whispered. "He told me to read the boring parts." "Then what in God's name are you waiting for?" Margaret's voice was a drill sergeant's bark. "Stop crying in your house and go find that document. Find the boring parts, read every single word, and then you call me back. We are going to burn this thing to the ground." I hung up the phone, my heart hammering in my chest. She was right. The time for grieving was over. Robert had left me a map. It was time to go on a hunt. Robert's study was my sanctuary after he was gone, but now it felt like an armory. I strode in there with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. The trust document wasn't filed away. Robert had kept it in the bottom drawer of his desk, the one that always stuck a little. It was in a heavy, dark blue leather portfolio, embossed with the name of a law firm I didn't recognize. Not David's firm, but an older, more established one downtown. It was heavy in my hands, a physical weight that mirrored the gravity of the situation. I sat in his worn leather chair, the one with the permanent impression of his shoulders, and opened the portfolio. The main body of the trust was what you'd expect, a dense forest of legal jargon establishing beneficiaries, defining assets, and laying out the duties of the trustee. I saw my name listed as the secondary beneficiary, with rights to the marital home for my lifetime, and a generous but specified monthly income. The restructuring I'd signed had effectively nullified that, replacing it with a discretionary stipend to be determined by the trustee, by David, or more accurately, by Cassandra. My hands trembled as I flipped past the main sections, past the schedules of assets and the distribution plans. My heart was pounding. Robert's voice echoed in my mind. The appendices, the boring parts. At the very back of the binder, behind tabs labeled Schedule A Real Estate Holdings and Schedule B Investment Accounts, was a final, unassuming tab. It was labeled simply Governance and Contingencies. It was the boilerplate, the section any arrogant lawyer, so sure of his own cleverness, would skip. The pages were dense, single-spaced, a wall of text. I forced myself to read slowly, my finger tracing each line. I read about trustee succession in the case of death or incapacitation. I read about dispute resolution mechanisms, and then I found it. It was the third clause on the 5th page of the appendix, nestled between a paragraph on tax law compliance and another on administrative fees. Clause 1138. The number seemed so random, so innocuous. But the words were a work of art. They were a time-delayed bomb. I read it once, then twice, then a third time, my breath catching in my throat. The language was precise, academic, and utterly devastating. It stated, and I remember the words as if they were carved into my soul. In the event of any attempt, formal or informal, to dissolve, reform, substantively recharacterize, or otherwise restructure the original trust corpus in a manner that diminishes, restricts, or subjects to discretionary approval the specified rights, benefits, or access of the named secondary beneficiary, Bethany Miller, without her express, uncoerced, and fully informed written consent, documented by a separate and distinct legal instrument that explicitly references this clause, then sole, absolute, and irrevocable trusteeship of the Robert P. Miller Family Trust, along with all attendant powers and responsibilities, shall immediately and automatically revert to the said secondary beneficiary, Bethany Miller. I leaned back in the chair, the heavy document resting in my lap. A slow, wide smile spread across my face. It wasn't a loophole, it was a guillotine. Robert the Builder had anticipated the point of failure. He had anticipated Cassandra's greed and David's weakness. He knew they would see the restructuring as the perfect plan, and he had built the trigger for their own demise right into the heart of their strategy. By convincing me to sign their papers that diminished my specified rights, they hadn't cut me out. They had handed me everything. They had sprung the trap on themselves. The sheer, beautiful, elegant brilliance of it left me breathless. It was Robert's final perfect move in a chess game they didn't even know they were playing. But the real power shift wasn't just in their panic. It was in the slow dawning awareness of others. News, especially bad news, involving money and status, travels at the speed of light in a community like ours. Cassandra, in an attempt to control the narrative, had clearly started a smear campaign. I heard whispers, third hand from friends. She was telling people I had lost my mind with grief, that I had stolen the family fortune out of spite, that I was a vindictive, crazy old woman. Some people, the ones who only knew them from cocktail parties and charity galas, probably believed her. But the people who mattered, the ones who had known Robert and me for decades, the ones who remembered David as a boy before Cassandra had polished him into this cold, ambitious stranger, they weren't so sure. They saw the sudden sale of Cassandra's new Mercedes. They noticed David and Cassandra were suddenly absent from their usual table at the country club. The story didn't quite add up. My silence was more powerful than her noise. The most painful part of this entire affair came in the form of a phone call from my granddaughter, Chloe. She called me one evening, her voice small and trembling. I could hear shouting in the background, the distinct, sharp timbre of Cassandra's fury and David's weaker, placating tones. "Grandma," Chloe sniffled. She's really mad. She's yelling at Dad. She said you stole all our money, and we have to sell the house." Her voice broke. "Is it true? Are we going to be poor?" My heart ached for her, a child caught in the shrapnel of her parents' greed. This was the one thing I had feared, that my actions would hurt her. I took a deep, steadying breath. It was critical that I separate the battle from the innocent bystander. "Oh, honey, no," I said, my voice full of a warmth I hadn't used in weeks. "Listen to me very carefully. The family money is safe. It's very safe. What happened is that your parents made some very, very bad decisions, and I had to step in to protect the legacy your grandpa Robert left for all of us, including you. This is not about you, and you will never ever have to worry. You are my granddaughter, and you are loved, and you will always be taken care of. This house is always your home. Do you understand?" "I think so," she whispered. "This is a fight between the adults, Chloe. It's ugly and I'm sorry you have to hear it, but it has nothing to do with my love for you." Okay, Grandma." That conversation solidified my resolve. My actions weren't just about vindication anymore. They were about stewardship. I was protecting Chloe's future from her own parents. A week later, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived by courier. It was a formal letter from a ridiculously expensive law firm in the city, the kind with 20 names on the letterhead. It was a masterpiece of blustering intimidation, full of cease and desists and accusations of tortious interference and breach of fiduciary duty. They were accusing me of the very things they themselves had done. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I scanned it, then calmly forwarded the PDF to Arthur. He called me back 30 minutes later, laughing. "Bethany, this is wonderful," he said. "This is the legal equivalent of a toddler throwing a tantrum. It's designed to scare you into submission. They have no standing. They triggered the clause. They put the gun in your hand and helped you aim it at their own feet. Don't even think about this. I'll handle it." With the legal front secured, Margaret and I turned our full attention to the audit. We spent the better part of a week at my dining room table, surrounded by piles of bank statements, credit card bills, and wire transfer confirmations. We created our own spreadsheet, a mirror image of the insulting budget Cassandra had sent me. But ours wasn't a budget, it was a reckoning. The scale of their larceny was breathtaking. The Bali trip, the lease on a downtown penthouse apartment they were keeping as a pied-à-terre, thousands of dollars funneled to a political consultant, who happened to be Cassandra's out-of-work brother. They hadn't just been spending the income from the trust, they had started liquidating assets. They had sold a small portfolio of municipal bonds Robert had meticulously curated for stability, all to fund their lavish lifestyle. They were eating the seed corn. Margaret would periodically look up from a statement, her glasses perched on the end of her nose, and just shake her head. "It's the sheer arrogance of it, Bethany," she said, her voice a low growl. "The disrespect. It's like they saw Robert's life's work as their personal party fund." By the time we were done, the total was staggering. In the 6 months leading up to their restructuring, they had burned through more than $250,000. It wasn't about revenge when I started, but looking at that final number on our spreadsheet, a cold, hard knot of fury tightened in my gut. Oh, this was about accountability now. This was about a final, definitive balancing of the books. The demand for a face-to-face meeting came through Arthur. David and Cassandra, through their legal pit bulls, insisted on a mediation. Arthur advised against it, calling it a fishing expedition, but I insisted. I needed to do this, not for them, but for me. I needed to look my son in the eye and close this chapter myself, in my own house, on my own terms. Robert had built me the fortress. It was time for me to stand on the battlements.